Her name is Bianca, my wife of 5 years. And if someone had told me 5 years ago that the woman who once cheered when I told her I wanted to start my own company would one day ask me to shrink that dream for the sake of a dinner party, I would have laughed. But there we were, sitting at a table too shiny to feel real, surrounded by people who wore their wealth like tailored armor, sipping something that probably cost more than my first MacBook. The evening air was cooled by whispering vents tucked into crown molding, and the clink of cutlery was almost rhythmic, like a metronome for a world I'd never quite felt part of. We were at Jocelyn's house, her childhood best friend. Jocelyn, who now went by Joss and hosted dinners like this once a quarter, just to show the city she hadn't lost her charm since marrying a man who owned more square footage than a hospital wing. Jocelyn's husband, Graham, was a venture capitalist. Real old money meets new tech kind of guy. Apparently, he just bought his second yacht, smaller than the first, meant for quick getaways, someone said, as if that was a phrase regular people used. The plates were bone white with a trim of gold, and each napkin was folded in a way that probably had a French name. I reached for the glass of red wine at my place, just as Bianca leaned in, smiling with the kind of teeth-clenched grace that looks lovely if you're not paying attention. "Please don't mention your job tonight. It's just, they're very finance," she whispered, her breath warm against my cheek. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard her right. My hand froze mid-air, fingers just brushing the stem of the glass. I blinked. Once. Twice. Then looked at her, searching her face for a joke that wasn't there. She was still smiling, tight and glossy, the kind that was for show. The kind I'd seen more and more since Jocelyn reappeared in our lives with her curated inner circle and her curated dinners and her curated opinions. "Sure," I said quietly. She didn't notice the pause in my voice. Or maybe she did and pretended not to. I am the co-founder of a medical diagnostics startup, Biometric Health. 3 years of sweat equity, sleepless nights, missed holidays, and ramen noodles. Just last month, we'd cleared a major funding milestone and filed a patent for a device that could change the future of early-stage cancer detection. Real science. Real lives. But apparently, that wasn't as charming as portfolios and private jets. I watched her laugh at a joke from Leighton, one of the men across the table, his teeth too white to be natural, his blazer so sharp it looked like it could cut. He was talking about vineyards and traffic like that was the worst thing that had happened to him this year. The others nodded sympathetically, clutching their glasses like they were trophies. No one asked what I did. No one seemed curious. It was assumed, perhaps, that I wasn't anyone worth asking about. Or maybe Bianca had preemptively scrubbed me of interest. That realization hurt more than I expected. When we first met, she used to brag about me, about my ideas, my drive, how I stayed up late sketching diagrams on napkins and whispered hypotheses into my phone when inspiration struck. She called me her mad scientist, her genius in hoodies. We used to joke that one day she'd be the one at the dinner party telling people. He built that. Not tonight, though. Tonight, I was supposed to be wallpaper. I sat through the courses in silence, nodding when appropriate, offering the occasional smile. When dessert came, a delicate thing that looked like art and tasted like sugar air, I found myself drifting. I thought about my team, about the lab, about the spreadsheet I'd meant to finish earlier that day. I thought about our lead engineer, Samir, who had once sold his car to fund an equipment purchase. I thought about the patient trials we were starting next month. And then I thought about how Bianca had leaned in, lips near my ear, and asked me to hide that part of myself. For optics. When the evening wound down, Bianca clutched my arm and said, "Didn't that go well?" Everyone was amazing. I just nodded. I didn't tell her how the air had felt thin around me the entire night. I didn't mention how small I'd felt in that room, not because of who they were, but because of who she'd asked me not to be. On the way to the car, she walked a step ahead, heels clicking confidently across the driveway. I followed, hands in my pockets, replaying her whisper like it was a loop stuck in my mind. "Please don't mention your job." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or make a scene. I just folded into myself, a little more than I already had. That night, she fell asleep easily, the way she always did after these events, her world soothed by surface perfection. I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. And around 3:30 a.m., I got up quietly, moved to the living room, opened my laptop, and kept working. For me. Not for her. Not for them. Just me. That dinner played out like a strange dream. One of those surreal sequences where you're wide awake, but every sound is muffled and every smile feels like it's aimed just past you. I sat there, next to my wife, but somehow miles away, as forks scraped porcelain and laughter pinged around the room like champagne bubbles bursting midair. I could feel the pressure of my tie against my throat, could taste the metallic edge of my own silence. I hadn't said more than a dozen words all night. Bianca shined that evening. She always knew how to shine. Her dress was a shade of emerald that caught the light every time she shifted her shoulders, her hair pinned in the kind of loose elegance that looks effortless but costs $300 and a 2-hour salon appointment. She laughed at the right times, asked questions with practiced curiosity, and knew every last person's professional title and where their kids went to school. No one asked me a thing. Not once did anyone turn and say, "And what do you do?" Because I wasn't there as a person. I was there as an accessory. A neutral plus one. The quiet husband. Leighton spent a solid 10 minutes talking about his equity in a firm that managed boutique hedge funds. Jocelyn gushed over a tasting menu she and Graham had flown to Montreal for, literally flown for. As in, just for dinner. Someone else, I think her name was Reese, mentioned she was worried about the fall gala clashing with her south of France trip. I mean, how can I not go to Provence in October? She sighed, as if the conflict was existential. I just smiled when Bianca glanced my way. She told me not to mention my job. And I hadn't. But the longer I sat there, the more I realized how much of me that erased. I'd become a ghost with a fork. Present only in shape, not substance. When the final course was cleared, a citrus tart topped with edible flowers, everyone rose to mingle by the terrace. I followed behind Bianca like a shadow. I remember watching her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, laughing at something Graham said. She looked happy. No, she looked pleased. Which isn't the same thing. Outside, the city skyline shimmered in the distance, all glass teeth and blinking lights. I leaned against the railing and let the cold from the metal seep into my palms. Conversations hummed like bees around me. Not a single voice broke toward me. I wasn't jealous. I was detached. There's a difference. Jealousy is hot and biting. What I felt was cool, quiet. The kind of emptiness that doesn't scream, it settles. I listened as Bianca told Jocelyn about a new art gallery opening, as if I wasn't 3 feet away. She didn't once pull me into the conversation. Not even a glance that might say, "You should hear what Cyrus is working on." Nothing. I stayed quiet. For her. We left just before midnight. I helped her into her coat, held the car door open. The driver greeted me politely, but Bianca didn't notice. She was already texting someone, her screen glowing against her cheek. She talked about the evening as we drove home. "Joss is amazing," she said, unbuckling her heels and resting her feet on the seat. "Did you see her dress? That was Dior. Vintage." "Nice," I said, my voice dry as the cab's recycled air. "And Reese is considering buying a villa in Tuscany. She says she might renovate the pool house into a recording studio for when her brother visits." "Isn't that insane?" "Yeah," I murmured. "Totally insane." She kept talking, more about Jocelyn's latest fundraiser, about how we should host something soon, something refined, something that could match the level of what we saw tonight. Her words blurred together after a while. I stared out the window, letting the city lights streak past like slow-moving stars. When we got home, she went straight to bed, said she was exhausted, and kissed my cheek with the precision of habit, not affection. "Thanks for being amazing tonight," she said, not realizing the irony of it. Not realizing that my silence, my obedience, was now what she considered amazing. She fell asleep within minutes. I lay beside her for a while, watching the ceiling fan spin slowly above us. Then I slipped out of bed. I padded into the living room barefoot, the hardwood cool under my feet. My laptop waited on the coffee table. I opened it without thinking, as if my body knew what I needed before my mind did. There was a new message from our lead engineer, Samir, about a breakthrough in the sensor calibration. I opened the file, reviewed the data, and began tweaking some of our predictive models. The hours melted away. My fingers danced over the keys in rhythm, a counterpoint to the stillness around me. By 4 a.m., I had finished an updated proposal for our next investor meeting and filed notes for the medical board presentation. I was exhausted but energized. Not because of the work, but because for the first time that day, I had been allowed to be me, unfiltered, unshrunk. In the silence of that pre-dawn hour, I saw the truth more clearly than ever. She didn't want me invisible because she didn't love me. She wanted me invisible because she didn't need me visible. I didn't fit into the curated puzzle of the world she was constructing. I was an original piece trying to wedge into a manufactured set. I looked over at her purse, tossed carelessly on the chair by the door. Inside, I knew she carried a gold pin with her initials engraved on it, gifted by Jocelyn for her promotion. She used it to sign things she deemed important. Bianca never signed anything I built, not even with words. Lights overhead, casting that sterile glow we'd all grown used to. When I saw the email subject line flash on my phone, "Congratulations, Forbes 40 under 40, class of the year," I paused mid-step, unsure if it was a mistake, maybe a phishing attempt disguised in flattery. But no, it was real. I opened the email slowly, heart thudding, and there it was, my name. Cyrus Eeleman, co-founder and CTO of Biometric Health. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. For a moment, I just stood there in the middle of the hallway, my phone warm in my hand. Samir passed me on the way to the testing room and gave me a thumbs up before I even said anything. "We saw it," he said, grinning. "You earned it." I nodded. I tried to smile. It wasn't that I wasn't proud, God. I was. The kind of pride that starts low in your chest and swells upward like heat. But I didn't run to call anyone. Didn't rush to share it. I just walked back into my office, closed the door quietly, and sat at my desk. I didn't tell Bianca. Not out of bitterness. Not because I wanted to punish her. But because I was tired. Tired of offering pieces of myself like gifts only to have them returned unopened. There's only so many times you can tell someone about your wins, only so many times you can say, "Look what I built," before the silence in response feels louder than any rejection. I thought about the last dinner party, about the way she'd leaned in and asked me not to mention my job, as if it was something shameful, something embarrassing, not bold or brilliant or bleeding edge, but inconvenient. That night came back in fragments as I stared at the screen, the dim candlelight flickering across bone-white plates. Her voice like a whisper behind a smile, "Please don't mention your job tonight." And I didn't. But Forbes did. I clicked through the digital article first. There I was, fifth on the list. A clean headshot from our investor pitch deck. The blurb mentioned our work with cancer diagnostics, our novel biomarkers, the pending patent. Words like innovator, visionary, trailblazer. Not terms I ever used for myself, but seeing them in print, it meant something. It meant someone saw me. It meant the work mattered. I scrolled past the congratulatory messages from other honorees, past the ad for luxury watches I'd never buy, and down to the social share buttons. I hovered over the LinkedIn icon for a full minute before I finally clicked it. In the post, I kept it simple. No long caption. No flourish. No mention of Bianca. Just, "Proud of the work we've done. Proud of the team behind it. Humbled." I hit publish and closed the app. No tags. No shoutouts. No subtle nods to a wife who hadn't asked how my last prototype meeting went or even what we were building. She didn't even know the names of the people I worked with every day. She could tell you what Jocelyn wore last Thursday, though. Could recite Leighton's yacht specifications and Graham's latest commercial building square footage. But my milestone, my spotlight, she hadn't asked. Not once. I kept my phone face down for the rest of the day. The congratulations rolled in anyway. My inbox filled with colleagues, founders, friends from undergrad who'd followed the journey from the beginning. Even my old chemistry professor sent a message. "Didn't I say you'd shake the world one day?" I smiled at that one. Around 8 p.m., I was still at the office. The building had mostly emptied out, but I stayed. Not because I had work to finish, but because I wasn't ready to go home. Home meant pretending. Home meant watching Bianca scroll through her phone and talk about Jocelyn's upcoming gala, acting like my silence was just me being low energy. She had no idea what was happening in my world, and I didn't have the strength to explain it anymore. I ordered dinner to the office. Chicken shawarma from a hole-in-the-wall down the block that Samir swore by, and ate it alone in the break room. No fanfare. Just a quiet kind of satisfaction. Later that night, as I sat in my office chair, the city lights bleeding orange and white through the blinds, I took out a small notepad and scribbled a quote I'd read once. I didn't know where it came from, but it always stuck with me. There's a special kind of loneliness in being uncelebrated by the person you thought would clap the loudest. I tore the page out and folded it twice. Slid it into my wallet, behind my ID. It wasn't that I needed Bianca's validation, but I had wanted it. I'd built something from nothing. I'd chased a dream through blood and burnout. And when the world finally stood up to applaud, she wasn't even in the room. But I was. And for now, that had to be enough. Not because I told her. Not because she happened to see my post online. But because her coworker forwarded her a Google alert. That's how it finally reached her, through someone else's surprise. I came home late that evening, worn from another full day of meetings and lab strategy calls. I'd stopped at the Vietnamese place down the block and picked up pho, still steaming in the paper bag dangling from my wrist. The apartment was quiet when I stepped in. No music, no clinking of dishes. Just Bianca, standing in the living room, her phone in her hand like it was burning her. She didn't even greet me. Didn't ask about my day. Her voice cut straight through the silence like a blade. "You made Forbes?" Her tone wasn't celebratory. It was stunned, disbelieving, like I'd pulled off a magic trick she hadn't approved. I set the bag on the counter and met her gaze. "I did," I said simply. There was a long pause, the kind that stretches until it frays at the edges. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. I shrugged, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I had too many. I walked over to the cabinet, pulled down a bowl, and started pouring the broth slowly, watching the steam rise in lazy curls. "You asked me not to mention my job," I said. The words were quiet, but they landed like a slap. She blinked, took a half step back, as if the impact rippled through her body. Her mouth opened, maybe to defend herself, maybe to apologize, but nothing came out. Just silence. She stood there with her perfectly manicured hand still clutching the phone, the screen gone dim now. Her shoulders sagged slightly, like the weight of the truth had pulled something out of her. "I didn't mean," she started, but even she didn't believe it. "No," I asked gently, not bitter, just tired. "Because that's exactly what you said. Don't mention it. Don't share it. Don't bring it up." So I didn't. She looked like she was trying to make the math work in her head. Trying to connect the dots between the man she had asked to dim himself at a dinner party and the man now being recognized on a national stage. I carried my bowl to the table and sat. Took a bite. The broth was rich, comforting. I let it fill the space where anger used to sit. Bianca didn't move. Didn't sit across from me like she usually did. She stood in the same spot by the doorway, one hand on her hip now, the other still holding the phone. "Everyone at work is talking about it," she said eventually. "Jocelyn sent me the link. Even Leighton said something." I nodded. Good for Leighton. She flinched at the tone. Maybe because it was the first time I'd said his name without gritting my teeth. "You should have told me," she said again, but softer this time. Like she wasn't entirely sure anymore. "I did," I said, lifting another spoonful. "Just not with words." She frowned. "I've been telling you in every way I know how. Every late night, every early morning. Every time I stayed quiet because you needed me to be. Every time I let you have the spotlight because I thought we were on the same team. I told you with my silence. I told you by staying." Bianca sat down then, across from me, finally. She wasn't glowing now. No curated perfection. No dinner party mask. Just a woman who'd realized something too late. She didn't congratulate me. Not really. She didn't say she was proud, or amazed, or that she knew I had it in me. She just sat there, eyes flicking between my face and the edge of the table, as if she were searching for the right words in a language she'd never learned. And for the first time, it didn't hurt. I didn't feel gutted by the lack of praise or validation. I didn't feel a sharp ache or a craving for recognition. I felt free. Because the moment she said nothing, I knew everything. The room stretched quiet again, only the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the space. I finished my meal and stood, carrying the bowl to the sink. I rinsed it, dried my hands, and turned back to her. "I'm not angry," I told her. She looked up at me then. Really looked. Like maybe for the first time in months she saw me. I just finally stopped asking for applause from a room that wasn't even watching. I walked out of the kitchen and into the bedroom. Not slamming doors. Not making a scene. Just reclaiming my own air to breathe. Behind me, I heard her phone buzz again. Probably Jocelyn. Probably another person shocked that I was more than a background prop. I didn't care anymore. For years, I tried to be enough for Bianca in the way she measured worth. Through image, through social polish, through the approval of people with last names that opened doors. I'd folded parts of myself to fit that shape. But my shape had changed, and I wasn't folding anymore. Photos of us at brunch. A blurry shot of me typing at my desk. An old picture from our wedding, cropped perfectly around her hand on my chest. The captions were syrupy, curated, performative. So proud of this genius I married. Changing the world quietly. Quietly. That word again. I'd reread it a dozen times the morning she posted it. Staring at the blue glow of my phone screen while sitting in the same chair where, just days before, I'd found the strength to stop explaining my worth to the one person who was supposed to already know it. She didn't say those things to me. Not when the news hit. Not when Forbes published the follow-up article with the headline, Cyrus Ehleman, the scientist who might save 1 million lives. Not even when my old mentor from Johns Hopkins texted to say he was proud to have known me before I had a Wikipedia page. Bianca said them online. She tagged me so other people would see. So the people she used to protect me from could now praise her for being the wife behind the man. Except she wasn't behind me. Not in the way that mattered. She was beside me for photo ops and ahead of me when the crowd started cheering. And yet, despite the bitterness curling under my ribs, I didn't confront her. I didn't pick a fight or call her out. I let her tweet. I let her post. I let her wear borrowed pride like a designer coat she had just rediscovered in the back of her closet. Her friends changed, too. Leighton now greeted me with a clap on the back and called me a visionary. Jocelyn said she loved to pick my brain over coffee sometime, as if I hadn't once sat across from her in silence while she debated the ethics of buying a third property. Suddenly I was interesting. Suddenly my name had weight. I remember standing in the kitchen at Jocelyn's brownstone during a casual Thursday night wine tasting when one of Bianca's old college friends approached me, glass in hand, eyes bright with recognition. "You're the diagnostics guy," she said. "The one with the patent?" I nodded. "That's incredible," she gushed. "Bianca always said you were working on something major." No, she hadn't. Not once. But I smiled anyway. "Thanks," I replied. "It's been a journey." She drifted off to refill her glass, and I just stood there, caught between two truths. The one the world now believed, that I was some noble genius backed by a supportive spouse, and the one I lived daily, that I had built all of this in the quiet, with no one clapping in the hallway, with no one waiting at the kitchen table asking how the meeting went. Later that night, Bianca wrapped her arms around my waist while I loaded the dishwasher. "You were great tonight," she murmured into my back. I nodded, eyes on the silverware basket. She didn't say, "I'm proud of you." She didn't say, "I'm sorry I asked you to hide your light." She didn't ask if I was okay navigating this sudden fame while still holding the burden of building a life-changing device. She just wanted to say we were great. We. As if now that I'd been validated by others, I belonged to her again. But I'd already stopped showing up emotionally. It wasn't a choice made in a single moment. It was a quiet erosion, like stones shaped by water, slow, steady, inevitable. I still showed up physically. I attended the brunches. I smiled in the photos. I kissed her forehead when she leaned in. But inside, I was stepping back, one heartbeat at a time. I started staying later at the office, even when I didn't need to. I found excuses not to attend events, claimed lab emergencies, or early investor calls. Most of the time, they weren't lies. But they weren't the reason, either. I just didn't want to pretend anymore. Didn't want to sit in another room filled with people who now saw me only because someone else had shown a flashlight on my back. Didn't want to accept compliments from people who'd barely made eye contact before. More than anything, I didn't want to smile at Bianca like nothing had cracked. One night, I sat on the couch with her while she scrolled through her phone. She laughed at a meme, showed me a post from Reese about her trip to Ibiza. Then she scrolled to her own page and smiled at the comment section under a photo of us. #power couple. #grateful wife. #quiet genius. I watched her bask in it. In likes and digital applause. "You love this, don't you?" I asked softly. She looked up, still smiling. "What do you mean?" "This. The image. The idea that we're the perfect team." "Well, aren't we?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She turned back to her phone, and I turned back into myself. There was no explosion. No screaming match. No dramatic fight where truths were hurled like dishes. Just the slow, steady unraveling of a thread I'd tried too long to keep from fraying. I wasn't angry. I was done performing. A journalist reached out about 2 weeks after the Forbes feature. Her name was Renee Lott, writer for Scientific World, known for digging beneath the surface of breakthroughs to tell the stories of the people behind them. Her email was respectful, direct. She'd followed our work, she said, was fascinated by the human aspect of our startup, the long nights, the why behind the science. "We want to hear your story," she wrote. Who you were behind the science. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't used to people wanting me. They usually wanted what I could build, what I could pitch, what I could fund. This was different. She didn't want the polished version. She wanted the real one. I agreed. We set a call for Friday morning. I sat at my desk, coffee cooling beside me, laptop open, trying to look awake enough for Zoom and calm enough not to overshare. Renee was sharp, but not performative. She asked smart questions, not just about our diagnostics platform, but about the early days, the garage experiments, the prototypes that failed. She asked about our motivation, why cancer detection, why this path, why now? And finally, she asked something no one else had. What surprised you the most about this journey? I paused. My throat tightened in a way I hadn't expected. The answer I gave in that first draft was polished. Clean. It's been humbling, I said. You learn a lot about persistence, about your limits. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do this work. She nodded, and we wrapped the call. I thanked her. She promised to send a draft. But when I closed the laptop, I sat there in silence. That question echoed. What surprised me the most? It wasn't the science. I'd always known we could crack the code if we worked hard enough. It wasn't the funding hurdles, either. Those were expected. It wasn't even the fatigue or burnout. What surprised me most was how lonely it felt when the people closest to me didn't see the thing I was fighting to build. And how long I stayed anyway. That night, I opened the draft response Renee had sent over to confirm the quotes. I read through my words and winced at how clean they sounded. How safe. Like someone talking through a press release. Then I opened a blank email and deleted every sentence I'd rehearsed. I started fresh. No filter. No performance. I wrote. Sometimes the people closest to you aren't rooting against you. They just don't want you to shine too far beyond their reach. I hovered over the send button. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear of being honest, but from realizing just how long I hadn't been. I hit send. The article came out 4 days later, both print and digital. It opened with that quote. Front and center. Bianca read it at breakfast. She hadn't said much that morning, just poured herself orange juice and scrolled through her phone while the news murmured in the background. I was buttering toast when her breath caught. Then she looked up, holding her phone like it had betrayed her. You said this to a journalist? She asked, voice low but sharp. I didn't answer immediately. I took a bite of toast. Swallowed. Sipped my coffee. Then nodded. I did. Her eyes flicked over the quote again. I could see the storm starting behind her face. The need to reclaim control of the narrative, to question my wording, to make this about her. You made it sound like I was jealous of you. I made it sound like I told the truth, I said calmly. You know how this makes me look? I nodded. Maybe now you know how it felt. The silence that followed was colder than the tile beneath my feet. She stood there for a moment, blinking at me like she didn't recognize who I was. Or maybe like she was seeing me for the first time. No apology came. No defense. No denial. Just distance. She didn't speak to me for 2 days. No texts, no shared meals, no passing remarks. It was as if I'd turned into a guest in my own apartment, an unwelcome one at that. But strangely, I didn't miss her voice. I didn't feel a void. I felt peace. Not because I'd hurt her, but because I'd finally said what I needed to say, even if it wasn't said directly to her. I'd been swallowing that truth for years, holding it between my teeth like a seed that would never be allowed to bloom. Now it was out, and the air tasted better. I went to the office earlier the next morning, stayed later that evening. When I returned, the lights were off in the apartment. Her side of the bed was turned away from mine. We weren't fighting. We were fading. And it turns out, that's the quieter ending, but no less final. It was another dinner, another table, another curated crowd of people who all seemed to know each other's middle names, vacation homes, and startup valuations. We were seated at a long marble table at some new restaurant where the chairs were too sleek to be comfortable, and the plates arrived looking more like sculptures than meals. The lighting was dim in that expensive way that makes it hard to see your food but perfect for hiding discomfort. Leighton, Bianca's favorite dinner party parrot, was already on his second glass of Bordeaux when he lifted his glass toward me and said, far too loudly, to Cyrus, the quiet genius among us. The table laughed, raising their glasses with varying degrees of sincerity. Some of them meant it. Others were just following Leighton's lead. Bianca smiled like she'd rehearsed for it. I smiled too, but mine was hollow. Everyone took a sip, and the noise picked up again, conversation flowing like champagne. I looked around at the faces. Jocelyn was talking about a new charity gala. Reese was gushing about a new investment portfolio she was launching. Leighton was halfway through a story about meeting the governor, punctuated with self-satisfied chuckles. And me? I was just waiting for the next polite nod. The next empty question. The next compliment that skimmed the surface and never went deeper. Because they didn't know me. Not really. They knew the idea of me. The one Bianca had rebranded. And I had let her. But tonight, I didn't feel like staying hidden. When the topic turned to innovation and someone asked about the challenges of growth, Leighton motioned to me again. Cyrus probably has thoughts on that, he said with a grin. What's it like to go from startup to rockstar in a year? Everyone turned. Eyes on me. I leaned back slightly, letting the silence sit for a beat too long before I answered. Sometimes, I said slowly, you stay quiet so long, people mistake it for humility. The table stilled for a moment. I let my gaze drift toward Leighton, then to Bianca. But it wasn't humility. It was just survival. Bianca's fork hit her plate. Not loud, not dramatic, but enough. Enough to break the spell. Jocelyn laughed nervously and said something about how founders were always deep thinkers. Someone else asked if I meant the industry or the media. I didn't clarify. Bianca didn't speak for the rest of the meal. She smiled when expected, nodded when needed. But I could feel the frost growing between us with every passing minute. She didn't touch her wine. Didn't look at me. Later, as we walked back to the car, her heels clicked hard against the sidewalk, sharp and fast. I followed, hands in my pockets, watching her spine stiffen more with every step. Once we were inside, doors closed and the driver pulling away, she turned to me, voice low and tight. Was that necessary? She asked. I didn't pretend not to know what she meant. I didn't feign confusion or apologize out of habit. I looked her in the eye. You tell me, I said. Her jaw clenched. You embarrassed me. No, I said calmly. I embarrassed the version of me you curated. The one who doesn't speak. The one who nods politely while you shine. That's not fair. Neither was asking me to hide the part of me that matters most. Neither was pretending to be proud of something you never asked about. She turned toward the window. Her reflection in the glass looked tired. Or maybe that was mine, caught beside hers. You knew how important tonight was, she muttered. And that was it. The truth. It was important for her. Not for us. Not for me. Just for the image. The illusion. The performance. I'm not going to keep pretending, Bianca, I said softly. I've spent too long making myself small in rooms you wanted to feel big in. She didn't answer, and I didn't fill the silence. We got home without another word. She walked in first, dropped her bag on the entry table, and disappeared into the bedroom. I stood in the dark kitchen for a long time, listening to the muffled sound of her unzipping her dress, the soft thud of heels hitting the carpet, the sounds of someone undressing for bed, but not for closeness. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, staring at the black window above the sink. My reflection looked older than I remembered, sharper around the edges, but clear. I used to think the death of love was loud, arguments, betrayal, shouting matches. But now I knew better. Sometimes it's silence, a quiet disconnection, 1,000 unsaid things until all that remains is the echo. We slept in the same bed that night, but it felt like a border had been drawn down the middle. I didn't reach for her. She didn't turn toward me, and I lay there, wide awake, knowing with certainty she wasn't losing me. She already had. No storm, no slammed doors, no shouting match that echoed down the hallway. Just a folded note on the kitchen island, beside a ceramic bowl of fruit that was more for decoration than eating. A banana freckled with brown spots. 3 green apples, still untouched from the last grocery run. That's how I left it, quiet, careful, deliberate. I'd already packed the night before. Just the essentials. 2 duffel bags, one with clothes, one with gear, laptop, drives, prototype models I didn't trust in shared space anymore. I didn't want anything from the walk-in closet we once pretended was too small. Didn't want the framed engagement photo. Didn't want the scent of her perfume clinging to the throw blanket she used when we watched movies in silence. The apartment was still. The kind of stillness that makes you aware of your own breath. Bianca had left for yoga. I knew her schedule. Knew the block of time I had before she'd return, flushed and composed, with a smoothie in hand and a comment about how exhausted she was. I timed my exit precisely because I didn't want it to turn into a scene. Not out of cowardice, but because I was done performing. Even a final argument would have been a final script. I wasn't giving us that encore. The note was simple. No poetry. No over-explanation. Just truth. I read it over one more time before placing it down. When you made me small to make yourself shine, I stayed. When you told me to hide the thing I was most proud of, I stayed. But you lost me the moment you tried to dim me in a room full of strangers to protect your image. I signed it with my name. Not Love Cyrus. Just Cyrus. Clean. Final. Outside, the city was stretching into morning. Delivery trucks rumbled past. A dog barked from someone's balcony. It felt ironic how normal the world was as mine split quietly into a before and after. The cab was waiting by the curb. I slid into the back seat, gave the driver the address of my new apartment, a one-bedroom across the river. Nothing fancy. Just quiet. Clean. Mine. As the cab pulled away, I looked back once. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to remember the stillness. The way the building stood tall and glassy, hiding 1,000 unsaid things behind its gleam. The ride was short. 15 minutes of traffic, a handful of lights. I didn't check my phone. I didn't brace for fallout. I just sat there, letting the silence settle into my chest like something earned. When I stepped into the new apartment, the air smelled faintly of fresh paint and dust. A single key hung from the lock, still cold from the realtor's handoff yesterday. The space was small, but not tight. Just enough. A mattress leaned against the wall. Boxes marked kitchen and lab set near the kitchenette. Sunlight streaked across the floor, cutting the room into gold and shadow. I exhaled and set my bags down. This was mine. I spent the next hour unpacking. One drawer for clothes. One shelf for notebooks. I set up my workstation first priorities. Monitors. Power cords. Whiteboard. My old lab sketchbooks, worn from years of back pocket pressure. Everything clicked into place like it had been waiting for this reset. Around noon, I brewed coffee for the first time in the new space. No frother. No imported beans. Just a drip pot and a ceramic mug that read "Build boldly," a gift from our first investor, back when we were just two guys in a garage who believed too hard. I sipped it slowly. No noise. No Bianca moving behind me. No curated playlist humming from her phone. Just my own breath, the tick of the clock, and the sound of water settling in pipes. Freedom is rarely loud. It comes like this, quiet, understated, with the scent of coffee and the ache of furniture waiting to be assembled. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I didn't even miss her. That was the part one hadn't expected. I thought leaving would crack something open. I thought I'd sit on the floor and feel everything at once. But there was only relief. Because I hadn't left impulsively. I hadn't walked out on a whim or in a rage. I had walked out with clarity. The kind that comes when you realize the person you've been trying to share your world with never bothered to step inside it. Bianca didn't try to call that day. I don't know if she found the note immediately or if she stared at the empty hallway for an hour trying to make sense of the silence. Maybe she walked into the kitchen and thought I was in the shower. Maybe she saw the note before she even set down her yoga mat. I didn't ask because it didn't matter. I didn't need to see her reaction. I didn't need one more conversation to explain the same things I'd said with my absence 100 times before. I had spent too long trying to translate myself to so. And for the first time in a long time, so did I. She didn't call again. Instead, she left a voicemail, one of those messages that sounds like someone trying not to sound like anything at all. I remember standing in my new apartment's kitchenette, pouring coffee into a chipped mug, when the notification popped up. Just her name. No photo. Just Bianca voicemail, one. I let it sit for a while. An hour, maybe two. When I finally tapped play, the audio clicked on like a ghost rising. You could have at least talked to me first, she said, her voice flat. Tired. You didn't even say goodbye. I leaned against the counter, letting the silence stretch out when the message ended. That was it. No apology. No questions. No panic. Just quiet outrage wrapped in expectation. She was upset I'd walked out. Not because she wanted me back, but because I didn't follow the script. I hadn't given her the closure she thought she deserved, the chance to perform heartbreak in a way that preserved her dignity. But the truth is, she never said hello. Not to me. Not to the man I became in those late-night labs, in the small victories she never asked about. She said hello to a version of me that fit her world. The curated one. The background husband. The plus one with potential. She smiled at the version of me that wore suits at galas, who nodded graciously when introduced to hedge fund managers and real estate tycoons. She married that version. She clapped for that version. But she never saw the man behind it, because she didn't want to. After the voicemail, I didn't return the call. I didn't text. I didn't post anything cryptic. I just moved forward. Friends asked questions. Some were quiet about it. Others not so much. You guys were perfect, one said, frowning into her cappuccino. Did something happen? Another asked. Her tone hushed like it was gossip from a royal court. But it was always phrased the same way. Did something happen? As if it was a moment. One event. A singular flame that burned the whole house down. It wasn't. It was a pattern of water dripping onto stone, over and over, until the shape of me was carved out in silence. It was erasure by inches. I stopped correcting them. Stop trying to explain what it feels like to shrink for someone who claims to love you. What it's like to be invited to rooms where your presence is tolerated, not valued. Where your greatest achievements are met with polite nods because they don't glitter the way money does. I kept working. The lab was humming with momentum. After the Forbes article and the Renee Lott piece, interest spiked. Our platform started gaining serious attention. Investors reached out, some out of genuine curiosity, others for PR proximity. The second round of funding was nearly closed. Samir and I worked 14-hour days, racing toward a clinical trial phase that would take our tech from prototype to protocol. One night, as I finalized an investor deck, a friend texted me a screenshot of something Bianca had posted. I didn't ask for it. I didn't want it. But there it was anyway. A selfie from her new place. High-rise view. Wine glass in hand. The caption read, "Some people leave. Some get loud. And some of us just keep growing." The one that got loud. That's what she called me. I stared at the screen for a long time. It should have made me angry. It should have stung. But all I felt was a weary kind of amusement. She still didn't get it. She still thought speaking up was the betrayal. That breaking the silence was what broke us. But I hadn't gotten loud. I'd gotten clear. If she only knew how long I stayed quiet before I finally let myself breathe. How many times I chose stillness over honesty just to keep the peace. How many versions of myself I locked away so she could shine in a world that didn't make room for both of us. I wasn't the one who got loud. She was the one who muted me. I thought about replying. Thought about leaving a comment, something sharp and elegant. But then I closed the app and set my phone down. Because I didn't need to be understood by the woman who curated me out of her life. I already knew who I was. I didn't need her caption to rewrite it. I spent that weekend assembling the last pieces of furniture in the apartment. A bookshelf. A small side table. I found a vintage lamp at a local market. Brass base, soft yellow shade. It reminded me of the first desk I ever studied at in college. Late nights buried in biomedical journals. Back when everything I did felt like trying to prove I belonged in the room. Now, I wasn't trying to belong anywhere. I had built the room. Sunday evening, I opened the windows and let the spring air drift through. I made pasta, not out of loneliness, but because it was familiar, a comfort I didn't need to share with anyone to enjoy. I sat on the floor, legs crossed, bowl in hand, and watched the light fade behind the skyline. There was no sadness, no guilt. There was only space. Space to think. Space to dream without judgment. Space to be exactly who I was, without editing myself for approval. I didn't check Bianca's page again. I didn't ask our mutual friends how she was doing, because that wasn't my story anymore. She'd chosen her audience. I had chosen my voice. We weren't at war. There was no villain. Just two people who'd stopped speaking the same language, and one of us had finally stopped pretending to understand. I was the one who got loud? Maybe. But sometimes, volume isn't about sound. It's about presence. And after years of whispering through clenched teeth and fake smiles, just standing in your truth, unapologetically, is the loudest thing you can do. The package came on a Tuesday. No return address. No note. Just a slim, rectangular box on my doorstep when I got home from the lab. I bent down, picked it up, turned it over in my hands. Brown paper. Taped edges. No handwriting. No sender. The kind of mystery that once might have unnerved me. But that evening, I just walked inside and set it on the counter. The apartment was quiet, my kind of quiet. The sun had dipped low enough to leave gold slashes across the concrete floor. My laptop blinked gently from the desk. Dinner was still simmering on the stove, something I threw together without much thought. The scent of garlic and thyme lingered in the air. It smelled like peace. I opened the box slowly, folding back the flaps with deliberate care. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, was a photo frame. Simple. Matte black. No ornamentation. Just a picture beneath the glass. I stood there, staring at it for a long time. It was me, 27. Standing in our first office, the office that was really a converted storeroom at the back of an old warehouse Samir's cousin had let us use rent-free. I was wearing a white lab coat with the sharpest stain on the sleeve. My hands were gloved. I was holding our very first prototype in both palms like it was made of glass. And I was smiling, grinning, really, with that wild, unshaped hope only someone that young and obsessed could wear without irony. I hadn't seen the photo in years. Bianca took it. I remembered the moment clearly. She'd stopped by with lunch, Thai food, spring rolls, 2 plastic containers of red curry. She'd walked in, seen me lit by a shaft of sunlight through the dust-streaked window, and said, "Wait, don't move." Then she snapped the picture with her phone. At the time, she was proud of me. Or maybe just amused by me. We were still in the phase where ambition looked like charm, not threat. Where my obsession with research was seen as noble and endearing, not inconvenient. She must have found the photo recently. Dug it up from an old folder or cloud backup. I imagined her holding it, debating whether to send it. I imagined the pause, the uncertainty. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't manipulative. It felt like an offering. A ghost of something that had once been true. I carried the frame across the room and set it gently on my desk, beside a stack of notebooks and the current iteration of our device. Slimmer, smarter, patented. I sat down and looked at the boy in the photo. He looked so sure, so full of fire. I wanted to reach through the glass and tell him 2 things. 1, your work will matter. And 2, don't shrink for anyone. He wouldn't have understood the second part yet. He hadn't lived through the dinner parties. The soft rejections disguised as etiquette. The tight smiles and tighter silences. He hadn't yet learned what it feels like to be slowly rewritten by someone who's supposed to know your original language. But he would, and he would survive it. I placed the frame carefully so it angled toward the window. Not because I missed her, but because it reminded me of a promise I'd almost broken, that I'd never apologize for being this person. The builder. The dreamer. The one who talked about molecular pathways and forgot birthdays because he was buried in spreadsheets and sensor data. The one who cared about lives that hadn't even been diagnosed yet. That photo was proof that I had always known who I was. The applause had never made me. Neither had the silence. The next morning, I took the frame to the office. Set it on the shelf behind my desk, next to the first blueprint we'd ever printed and a faded whiteboard marker that no longer wrote but still smelled like caffeine and invention. When our new research fellow walked in, bright-eyed, 23, freshly graduated, he noticed it. "Is that you?" he asked, pointing to the photo. "Yeah," I said, turning in my chair. Back when we didn't know if anything we were doing was going to work. He stepped closer. "You look happy." I was, I said, and scared, and broke, and obsessed. He laughed. "Sounds like now." "Exactly like now," I said, smiling. "Minus the broke part." He grinned and went back to organizing the equipment. I watched him for a moment, that fresh eagerness in his hands, the way he handled each item like it might spark a future. And I realized something. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone to name me valuable. The room was filled with people who saw it, who felt it, who were building with me, not on top of me. The investors had doubled their backing after our last trial. The medical board had approved a limited rollout. We were months away from real deployment, from real people using what we built to catch cancer before it ever had the chance to become lethal. We'd been featured in Wired, in Nature, in journals I used to read in dusty library corners with wide eyes and highlighters. And somehow, even in the middle of all that, I felt grounded, not floating, not puffed up by praise or press releases, just planted. Later that afternoon, Samir walked into my office, holding 2 iced coffees and a paper bag. "I brought the dangerous cookies," he said. "You've been working like a madman." "I am a madman," I replied, taking the coffee. "It's in the job description." He plopped down in the chair across from me and pointed to the photo behind me. "That the one she took?" "Yeah." "Why'd you put it here?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. To remember who I was before I asked permission to be him. Samir nodded. "He was always going to become you. Not if I kept trying to fit into someone else's frame." There was a long silence, but it wasn't heavy. It was mutual understanding. He didn't press. He didn't joke. He just passed me a cookie and changed the subject to lab budgets and trial sites. That night, I walked home along the river. The city lights shimmered across the water, and the wind carried the smell of late spring. Earth, pollen, the first hint of summer heat. I didn't feel like checking my phone. I didn't wonder if Bianca had posted anything else. I didn't care if she thought I got loud. I had, in fact, found volume. But not through shouting. Not through petty comebacks or performative moves. I had found it through self-definition, through choosing to be in rooms where I didn't have to dim, through building a life where the loudest sound was my own integrity echoing back at me. When I reached my apartment, I kicked off my shoes, turned on a lamp, and sat at my desk. The photo glowed softly in the amber light. I looked at that boy again, that hopeful, stubborn, brilliant boy, and I whispered to him, not out of nostalgia, but out of promise. You never needed anyone's permission to build something beautiful. And now, finally, you've stopped apologizing for it.